So this unit we're on right now is appraising real estate to pass your exam. Unit 20 in the 14th edition. So an appraisal is in a distinct area of specialization in real estate. And it provides clear understanding of the market's response to the subject property. When we talk about subject property, we're talking about the property that's being appraised. You may want to make a note of that. So you have to know a little bit knowledge of the fundamental principles so that you can prepare what we call a CMA, Comparative Market Analysis. So you have to have an appraiser's license to do an appraisal, okay? But as a real estate agent, you're going to be doing CMAs to help people determine what list price they're going to list their home. So the biggest difference between a CMA and an appraisal, one is an appraisal has to follow what they call USPAP's guidelines, and they give a specific number as of a specific date. Where a CMA, you don't have to follow USPAP guidelines, and you have a range of value. Now, you only can do a CMA for somebody who's thinking of selling their house, and you're going to give them a range, or a buyer to assist the buyer in making an offer. In Pennsylvania, it requires an appraisal license, state, and there's 3 different types of appraisers. You may want to know these, okay? There's 3 different types. There's a state certified general appraiser. He can appraise anything, commercial property, residential property. Then you have the state certified residential appraiser. So he is just going to be for residential appraisals. And then you have a broker appraiser, okay? A broker appraiser. And remember, a comparative market analysis is not an appraisal. Bear with me, guys. I'm having some technical difficulty. So you have 3 different types. What are they? 3 different types of appraisal.
Broker appraiser.
Okay. What are the other 2? So the general appraiser could do what?
Everything.
Everything. Commercial and residential. And then you have the residential appraiser. So again, a broker's price opinion is not an appraisal, but can be done to help a seller price or help a buyer. You have to know the difference between a CMA and a broker's price opinion and how they're used. Okay, so a CMA is different than a broker's price opinion and different than an appraisal. So you have 3 different things that are used there. Typically, a broker's price opinion is used where a lender will call and say, hey, it's like a short form appraisal. I just need a quick broker price opinion, drive by the outside of the house on 123 Happy Hollow and give me a rough idea what it's worth. Okay. A little bit about the appraisal process. This is a pretty short chapter, so we're going to be able to get through it pretty good. You have to state the problem, which is typically what the value is. You have to have a list of the data needed. You gather the records. You determine the highest and best use of the property. That's an important term. So, for example, if you're appraising a gas station, what's the highest and best use for that gas station? A commercial property, right? It wouldn't be a residential. And if you're appraising a residential home, the highest and best use would be a residential home, not a commercial gas station or commercial property. But sometimes, do you think you have properties that are kind of in the middle, that you're not sure what the highest and best use of that property would be? Maybe you have a residential home that's right in the middle of all commercial. So the appraiser's got it. So maybe, even though it's a residential home, Ray, it's in an area of all commercial. Go ahead.
An example would be down at Anthony Patino's agency in Georgia, right before the sheets. There's a house.
Right.
Back there, that would be what you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, if that house is sitting on 51,
right.
Maybe the highest and best use for that would be commercial, not residential.
Right.
Okay, so the appraiser has to determine that. Estimate the land value. They break the land value out when they do an appraisal. What's the value of the land and what's the value of the dwelling? And then there's 3 approaches that they use. And we're going to get into those. Then they reconciliate by looking at all 3 comparable sales and determine what the final value would be. So basically, there's 3 different approaches and we're going to get into them. You couldn't find anything over there, huh, Andrea? So property must have certain characteristics to have value in the real estate market. One is demand. And right now, that's the need or desire for possession or ownership, backed by the financial means to be able to purchase it. So right now, there is such a big demand and there's no supply. There's no supply. So what's that doing to prices? So if you're doing an appraisal, you're going to look, is there a lot of inventory on the market and not a lot of buyers? Or is there a lot of buyers on the market and a limited amount of inventory? So demand is one of the characteristics. You should know these characteristics for the test. Utility. And it's the capacity to satisfy human needs and desires. Does the subject property have utility? If it's a single family home, can it satisfy somebody's desire to live in that home? Scarcity, which is we have right now. And then transferability, relative ease to which ownership rights can be transferred from one person to another. And the acronym is DUST. So I would know those, D-U-S-T. Demand, utility, scarcity, and real estate is transferable. Thank you, Andrea. So market value. When an appraiser is determining market value, he is determining the most profitable price within a reasonable time on the market, cash or equivalent to cash, what somebody would pay, and it's unaffected by special financing or terms that somebody may offer. And market value is an opinion of value based on an analysis of data. So what they do is they go, let's say we're doing the market approach. Okay, the appraiser goes into the market and he looks for other homes that have sold that are comparable, Jace. Other homes that have sold that are comparable. Versus market price. And market price is what a property would sell for. So you need to know the difference between those two definitions. Market value is an opinion of value that the appraiser may put on that appraisal. Market price could be the price that somebody was willing to pay. And those two could be different, Jacob. Jake, did your wife have her baby? Not yet. So they could be different. So for example, you can have a house that appraises for 100, and that would be market opinion. But the market price, it sold for 97 or sold for 105. That would be the market price. Okay, that would be the market price. And it's a common misconception. A common misconception about valuing property is that the cost represents the market value. Cost and value may be the same when improvements on a property are new. So cost and value could be the same if you were doing a brand new house. So maybe a brand new house, these houses that Schuster's building. The cost to build that house and the value that they're selling it for could be the same. But once you get once you get a couple years into it, then they could be different. Okay, they could be different. What are the 4 characteristics of value in real estate? Thus, demand. What's another one?
Scarcity.
What's that?
Scarcity.
Scarcity. Utility. Transferability. Easy to transfer. So the basic principles of value would be properties appreciate, anticipation. The fact that a property, people, when they buy property, they anticipate that it'll be worth more in the future. Change. And that's the principle that no physical or economic condition stays the same. The market's always changing. Isn't life always changing?
Mm-hmm.
So does real estate. Competition, supply and demand. Conformity. Maximum value when a property is in harmony with its surroundings. Maximum value when a property is in harmony. What do I mean by that? Did you ever go into a housing plan and see this big monster house and then everything else? So it's worth $1 million and everything else is worth 200. Is that big monster conforming with the neighborhood? No. Or the example where you have a commercial area where a residential house is in there. It's not conforming to the area, right? It's not in harmony. But if you're looking at a single family home and a plan of single family homes, chances are that's in harmony with the neighborhood. Do you see what I'm saying with that? So that has a play to do with it. That has a little bit to do with it. Contribution. By adding a pool may not add the value of what it costs to do a pool. So you may be on an appointment, Ellen, and the guy says, man, I just put this pool in, it cost me $100,000. So the neighbor's house is similar to mine, and it sold for $350, but he don't have a pool. So mine should be worth $450. The cost of the improvement doesn't necessarily mean that the house is worth that much more. And we run across this a lot. You know, a lot of times kitchens, baths, you know, hot tubs. So, you know, when I talk to people, you know, where can they get the biggest bang for their buck? You know, a lot of times if you put a kitchen in, sometimes you could put $50,000 in the kitchen, but you may be able to get $25,000 more for it if it has a brand new kitchen in it. You know, you may be able to even get $50,000 more for it. I don't know. Kitchens are kind of one area that if you put money into, you can get money out of. Bathrooms are kind of the same way. But like Ray said, a hot tub. You put a hot tub in, and you got $5,000 in a hot tub, you're not going to get $5,000 out of the house because of that. So you have to look at the improvements. You know, sometimes decks are a good investment. Painting, it's a killer. Somebody wants to paint. So a lot of times people will call us out, and we'll come out and they'll say, hey, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. How much will increase my value? So you have to kind of guide them in the right direction. Does that make sense? Okay, good. And the highest and best use. We talked about that. Increasing and decreasing returns related to adding improvements to a piece of real estate. Increasing returns comes when the improvement adds more value, not necessarily the cost, but it would add more value. So would you agree, Garrett, that if you put a new kitchen in, the house is going to have more value if it had an old kitchen? Yes, but if the kitchen cost $100K, it may not add $100,000 to it. Maybe it'll add 20, 25. I don't know. You have to look at the comps and look at the market. Andrew. Can you work on Monday's meeting?
Yeah, that's what
I
I
haven't been doing Monday meeting.
Okay.
Plottage. That's when you have two lots worth, let's say, for example, 25,000, and you combine the two. Now you've got a bigger lot. Sometimes that lot is worth, if both lots cost 25, Lauren, sometimes that lot may be worth now 60 or 65 versus 50 because it's a bigger, more desirable lot. We call that plottage. So you got to know this terminology. Regression. The value of a higher quality property is adversely affected by the lower properties. Progression is vice versa. So my house is an example of progression. When I bought my house, the little neighbor girl came over and told my daughter, you have the smallest house in the neighborhood. You know, being catty. You have the smallest house in the neighborhood. But the fact that I do have the smallest house in the neighborhood and there's bigger houses around me, what's that do with my value? Pulls it up. Now, if you have the biggest house in the neighborhood along smaller homes, then the smaller homes would pull that value down of that bigger home. If that bigger home was in an area of all bigger homes, it would probably be worth more. So you have to look at that, and you have to know the difference between regression. Regression, you'd be coming down in value, that the neighbors and the neighborhood is pulling the value down because of the size. Progression, it would be pulling it up. In substitution, the property's maximum value tends to be set by how much it would cost to purchase a equal desirable property. And this is the foundation of the sales approach. So the sales approach is where you're comparing. There's going to be three different approaches we're going to go over, where you're comparing the subject property, and that's the property that you're doing the appraisal on, to three other properties that have recently sold. That's the comparative approach. Okay. And we're going to go over that. And again, supply and demand. So let's talk a little bit about the three approaches to value. because there's three different approaches an appraiser is going to use. Now we're talking about an appraisal, Christine, not a CMA. Okay, so this is an appraisal. The sales comparative approach, and this estimated of value is attained by comparing with other properties. This is the most common approach you guys that most appraisers are going to be using, and, or I should say putting more weight on, Paul, on if you're selling a single family home. So if you're selling a single family home and the appraiser comes out, he's going to want to look at three other homes that are comparable. If it's a 3-bedroom, 2-story, he's going to try to compare with other 2-stories. Now, if he finds a 2-story that's 2-bedroom, he can make an adjustment, okay, in the price. But very rarely is he going to compare a 2-story with a ranch. So if his subject property, his assignment is for a ranch, he's going to look for other ranches. And then if one has 2 bedrooms and his property has 1, he can make an adjustment. If one's in better condition, he can make an adjustment. So that's what and that's what you guys will be doing. So I can't wait. Great, your first listing appointment. You're going to be all excited. You're going to go out and look at the house, right? And the owner's going to say, what do you think it's worth? You have to say, give me a little bit of time to do some homework. And then if this guy has a 3-bedroom ranch with 2 baths and a finished game room, you want to go into the market in the same school district and try and find other 3-bedroom ranches with 2 bathrooms with a finished game room. Now, sometimes it's hard because all houses are just like people. They're not exactly the same. So you may find a 3-bedroom ranch has 2 bathrooms, but doesn't have a finished game room. So you'd have to go into the market and see how much more a buyer is willing to pay for a house with a game room versus a house without. Okay, so that's how you're, isn't that pretty easy? Don't you think you guys can do that right now? So don't get stressed out over this. Don't get stressed out over it. That's the sales comparison approach. You need to know these 3 different approaches. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you have somebody come in to do an appraisal, do you get somebody that's local, that's familiar with the area, or does?
Well, it depends on for what reason you want to get the appraisal. Like, for example, you as a real estate agent never order the appraisal. So typically, if there's a sale, okay, if there's a sale, who's going to order the appraisal? The lender. They're going to order an appraisal. Okay, and it's not uncommon for somebody from Pittsburgh to come down here and do an appraisal. It's not uncommon. So usually the lender will order the appraisal when there's a sale. If there's a death, typically the executor of the estate will order the appraisal if it's to determine inheritance tax. If it's a divorce, most of the time the wife gets, or I should say wife, one spouse would order an appraisal, the other spouse would order an appraisal, and then the judge would look at both of those appraisals. So typically the real estate agent doesn't order them. Is it better to have somebody that knows the local area? Yes, but there's not a lot of appraisers. So depending on the lender or whoever's ordering it, I get calls all the time that, do you know a good appraiser? And then I'll refer them somebody that I know, depending on the situation. So some factors for which adjustments to the comparative properties are made would be property rights, okay? So if you're doing an appraisal on a 100 acres of land, and you're comparing with other large parcels. Samantha, would you agree that if somebody has already sold the subsurface rights, that the appraiser needs to look at that, make an adjustment? Yeah. Yeah. So the property rights. Remember the bundle of rights? Or any of those rights already have been sold or conveyed? Financing. So adjustments for differences in mortgage loan terms or owner financing. If Azaria has a house that she sold, but she did owner financing, what do we call owner financing? What's another term for owner financing that we use? Installment land contract? Yes. Okay, so if she sold her house with owner financing, but Christine sold her house cash, and I'm using both of these, and then Samantha sold her house with 20% down financing, conventional, I may look at these three comps and say, well, I may have to make an adjustment to Azaria's because she sold an owner financing, which means she could probably get a little bit more, but she could be more flexible with the terms versus the cash. So you have to look at the financing. You have to look at any other conditions, motivational factors such as foreclosure, sale between family members. You have to look at the date. If you're looking at a comparable that sold a year ago, you may have to make an adjustment for time, because Seneca, would you agree that in this real estate market, if you're using a comp that sold a year ago, that same house may be worth more today because of appreciation. So I would kind of know these, but they're pretty straightforward. Location. Compensation for location or neighborhood differences. Okay, so if you're looking at using a comp and maybe that neighborhood is not as nice as the neighborhood that you're in, then there may be some type of an adjustment if you're an appraiser. And physical features and amenities. So these are all things the appraiser is looking at. And a dollar value is assigned to each difference. And that's how they make their adjustments. So let's say I'm doing that one with the financing. I'm using these three comps. Okay. And let's say the house, so your house sold for $100,000, but it was owner financing. Okay. And your house sold for $100,000 cash. I may make an adjustment for that, a dollar amount. So if I'm trying to appraise this house, and I'm just using the financing as one thing to adjust, and yours was owner financing, yours was conventional, yours was cash. Let's say all of them sold for $100,000. I may make an adjustment to yours because yours probably would have sold for 98 if it was regular terms. But since they offered the owner financing, they got a little bit more, so I may make an adjustment for $2,000 to your house. I'm trying to appraise your house. Now, let's say I'm looking at another comp, and it's her house. This is the subject property I'm appraising, and these three are going to be let's use these three here. Still, you're going to use the same comps, but make different adjustments. Okay, so I'm going to make a little adjustment for the financing here. Okay, then 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. I probably wouldn't make an adjustment for the bedrooms here, but I would make an adjustment for these two. Because if these two sold for 100 and they only had 2 bedrooms, then I'm thinking yours may be worth whatever an extra bedroom would bring in the market. Maybe it may be worth 110. So I make that adjustment in the dollar amount, $10,000. Maybe location. Good location, good location, good location, poor location. Then I may make an adjustment for the poor location in the dollar amount. And what the appraiser looks at is how much a buyer would be willing to pay more for a house in a good location versus a poor location. And then they use those dollar amounts to make the adjustments. Does that make sense, or am I losing you? What page are we at in the book?
401.
What is it?
401.
Okay, and then look right at the figure in 20-20.2. See how he's making? So finance concessions. There was none across the board. And this is what an appraisal report looks like. It has this grid just like this. Okay, financing, Date of sale, current, no adjustments. Location, good. So the subject property he's saying is in a good location. The comparable A, now he's comparing to 4 properties, saying, oh, comparable B is in a poor location. So he's making a $6,500 adjustment for location. C and D are the same. Age, same across the board. Lot size, landscaping. Go down to where he made an adjustment. Condition, average. See how he's making an adjustment? And the adjustment is always made to the subject property. And then he has an adjusted value. So look at A. A sold for 118,000, right? Sold for 118, but it's in a better location. It's in a better location than the subject. So so we're making the adjustment always to the subject, right? So if that property is in a better location than the subject, that means you have to take money off of it to be equal. So he's taking $1,500 off. And then, so the net adjustment would be 15. So the adjusted sale price in that case would be 116.5. Do you understand that? And then he does that with all the comps and he makes an adjustment. And then he looks at these comps. Now you don't just average them. You don't add them all up and divide by 4 and come up. You look at it and you come up with a conclusion. Maybe you look at which comp is the best comp and you make a determination. It's an opinion of value the appraiser comes up with. And the sales comparison approach is considered to be the most reliable of the 3 approaches. Okay, the most reliable. The cost approach, because there's 3 approaches that the appraiser is going to use. Jake, 3 approach. You need to know that there's 3. Okay, we already went over the first one, sales comparison approach. The second is the cost approach, and that's how much it would cost to reproduce that property and then depreciate for age. Now, with the cost approach, there's a couple different methods. I don't know if you're going to run across these, but the square foot method, cost per square foot of a recently built comparable. So you do the cost approach even if it's an older home, but you just may not put too much weight on it. But if it's a brand new home that you're appraising, brand new, nobody's ever lived in it, you'd put a lot of weight on the cost approach. Okay, and there's the square foot method, the unit in place method, the quality survey method, and the index method. So I don't know if you need to dig into those and spend too much brain power on them, but the square foot is easy. If this house was 2,000 square feet and this house, you estimate how much it costs per square foot to build that house. And then you can look at your subject property. So let's say you look at a house that's recently, that cost $200 a square foot to build. That's a little bit on the high side. And it's 1,000 square feet. It would be $200,000. But then now you're looking at your subject property is maybe 2,500 square feet. So you can say, well, it was about $150 a square foot looking at the comparables. So I'm going to multiply 150 times the square footage of my property to get an estimated value. Does that make sense? Okay. Units in place. It's the cost of constructing a building by estimating the installation cost, including materials of an individual component of the structure. Example, if you need 1,000 square foot of drywall to do the walls, what would the cost of the drywall be? So when we talk about square footage, we take square footage of the whole house, right? You can even break that down more if you use the units in place method, and you can figure how much would the drywall cost? How much would the flooring cost? How much would the roof cost? That's units in place. And a quantity survey method, more detailed than the units in place, and requires a breakdown of all the components. And then an index method is by using some type of index. So I wouldn't get too crazy. I wouldn't like lose sleep over knowing the difference, but I would know the square footage method under the cost approach. And I would know that the cost approach is reproduction cost versus replacement cost new. And then you also have to take into fact that depreciation, and it's the loss of value due to normal wear and tear. So if you're doing a cost approach and Azoria's house was built let's say 3 years ago, and they're using the cost approach. And the subject property that Lauren has is brand new, that we're trying to put a value on. You may look at that and say, okay, 3 years, but that house is now that everything's 3 years old. So we have to depreciate for that age, okay? And then there's physical deterioration, normal wear and tear that a building experiences as it ages. And then there's things that are curable, such as painting. Then there's incurable, like putting a new foundation in because of a crack. But the cost of repair, it may cost more to repair than it's worth with a crack in the foundation. It may cost more to repair and put that new foundation in than to just let it go the way it is. The new foundation is very expensive. But if you were appraising a house that needed painting, it may be feasible to paint because the cost of the painting is going to give you more value. Not that if you put 50 grand or $100,000 into a new foundation, you may not get $100,000 more out of the house. You see what I'm saying? So that's physical deterioration. Then you have functional obsolescence. Problems with the property. This too can be separated into curable. A new home has 2 bedrooms and a room for a home office. It could be very easily converted to a 3-bedroom. That would be curable. Incurable would be a 4-bedroom home with 1 bath and no place to put a bath in. So I had a house one time up in Skyline Drive that had functional obsolescence. It was a big 5-bedroom house, 5 bedrooms, had 3 baths, but it was on a very small lot. Very small. I mean, the backyard was about from here to that wall. And I told the owner, I said, the problem is it's a nice house, but it has functional obsolescence, because if somebody has a 5-bedroom home, typically they have they have a big family or a lot of people living there, right? So if you're going to buy a 5-bedroom home, aren't you going to want a bigger lot? But you have a big 5-bedroom home with a small lot. That's a functional obsolescence. Okay, that particular one can't be cured. But if you have a 2-bedroom and you can add a 3rd bedroom, that's a curable. Or if you have a 4-bedroom home with only 1 bath, that could be considered functional obsolescence, right? Don't we fight for the bathroom all the time when you have a lot of people living in the home? But if you have room to put another bath in, it would be curable. If you don't have room to put another bath in, it would be uncurable. Okay? And then there's external depreciation. Problems that are external to the property. This is always incurable. Like a power plant next door, or a commercial property right up against a residential property. So that would be external depreciation. So we're going to look at all 3 of these under depreciation. What page are we on? Then you have the income approach. So these different approaches, Ray, an appraiser would look at the subject property and then determine which approach would be better. If it's a 10-year-old residential house, we're going to use the market approach, right? If it's a brand new home, Jason, you would use which approach?
I would use the
You would, I shouldn't say use, because you're going to use all three of these approaches in every situation. Which one would you put more weight on?
square footage.
The cost approach. The cost approach. You have the market approach, the cost approach, and now the income approach. These are the three different approaches. So the income approach, you're going to determine the annual potential income, what the gross would be, what the expenses would be, and then you use the capitalization rate. And it's similar to a rate of return you would get on a CD. So you can look at this property, how much it is making, how much the expenses are, and then how much money, what kind of capitalization rate of return would be. And maybe this will be a place that we can look at, do some math on the cap rate. So why don't we do this? I'm just going to make a note. We're going to come back and we're going to do a math problem on a cap rate. Go to the questions on the test. Let's do it. Is there any of the questions that talk about a capitalization rate?
Yeah.
Okay, which number? What is it? Okay, number 7. Hey, Samantha, while these guys are doing this, can you come here for a second? So what I'm looking for is, okay, I do not make this one. Hey, Andrew. So, what do they need to pass? 75 or 80? 80 to pass. Yeah. Hold on. Hey, Tim, do you have a second? Yeah. Maybe I was mistaken at 75. Pass the first. That's okay. I'll catch back up with you. You, okay. So, okay, just sit tight and say check in. Just go on. It's a city. Yes, yes, that's why. That's your 1% break. And then that would answer the problem. I said,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm driving myself crazy here.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I did the first time, that's when I bought my transfers. I don't think it was amazing. I don't remember though. Yeah. I remember I filled it first.
This one.
I don't remember it either.
This morning, the sign problems.
If I didn't have my transfer.
$75% is what's required on the license.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
He said 80 though.
So you need to get
80 for the plus.
60 out of 80.
oh, that's less than 10%. Cooper paused.
What should I say?
No, I just do
Yeah, but that might be the actual
shoot
test.
your
That
T.
might be the
Yeah, that's
actual
the
test.
actual test. Shoot your T, I bet you it's the same.
Okay.
That's probably why I didn't have them redo those.
You
Okay.
just want everybody to get an 80%.
So we're trying to find a cap rate, right? I'm gonna use the picnic table approach to try to help you guys with this. Because we said that you have a big rock and a little rock. Which one sinks faster? The big rock. So the bigger number would go on the bottom, the littler number would go on the top. You have a percentage or a part of the whole. Okay? This is part. Throw this in the water, what's gonna happen? Water's gonna go in and it's gonna sink. So a percentage or a part would be what? The little number, correct? Would go down. Would be below. Except for that gross area over by the Steelers stadium, right? So gross rent multiplier or area, we don't use this exact formula. So I'm gonna draw my picnic table here. And we're gonna remember we divide down, right? So read the question to me.
If a property's annual net income is 24,000,
Okay, so this is net. This is what, 24,000,
yes,
okay?
and it is valued at 300,000, what is its capitalization?
What is the capitalization rate? So the net income would be, Azaria, gross income minus expenses would give you your net. So if you were gonna buy an investment property, wouldn't you wanna know what type of rate of return you would get for the money that you were buying it for? Right? Now, if you got a checking account, you know, there's no rate of return, there's hardly any interest you get on a checking account right now, because rates have been so low. So if the net is 24,000 and the value is 300, and we're looking for the cap rate, and the cap rate is a percentage, we're gonna be looking, where would the cap rate be? Up here or down here? Where does the percentage go on this? Down, right? So we're gonna be looking for the cap rate, right? Big number, little number. Which one goes on top?
24.
Big number goes down below. 24,000 divided by 300,000 is what?
8%.
What?
8%.
8%. That's the capitalization rate or the rate of return on this property. Okay? So if you had $300,000 you wanted to invest, where the heck can you get an 8% return right now? You know, maybe in the stock market, but you can lose 8% real quick in the stock market too, right? You can't get it in a savings account at PNC Bank. You can't even get it in a CD. You can't even get 8% in an annuity, if anybody knows what an annuity is. But if you bought this property, you can get an 8% return on your investment. So Jace, if you're an investor looking to buy properties, you'd be looking at this cap rate on just about every property you looked at, right?
Yeah.
So let me do the problem again. Different. The property has a capitalization rate of 10%. And it sold for, its net income is $35,000. What would the value of that be? So we put the 10% down here, right? And we're looking for the value. Is the value going to be bigger than the net? What's going to be more, the net gross yearly income or the value of the building? The value. So the net would go up here, 35,000. Because we're looking for the value, which is going to be the bigger number. So what's 35,000 divided by 10%? How much?
350,000.
So let's say you were looking at a building, Ellen, and it net 35,000. And the guy says, and you're the agent, and the guy says, here's my net. I'm net 35,000. And how much is my building worth? And you go into the marketplace and you do this calculation on 3 comparables that are close, and you find that you have a cap rate of 8%, 8%, and 10%. Okay? So you had a couple with 8, one for 10, maybe the one that's closest. You don't just average them. Maybe this one for 8% was very similar to what you had. Then you would take this 35,000. You know that the cap rate that investors are willing to pay, you're looking at properties that sold, you're looking at they would be willing or happy to get an 8% return. So what's 35,000 divided by 8?
$437,500.
There you go, 437,500. So if the property makes 35,000 a year net after all expenses, and you're looking to get an 8% return, because how did you come up with an 8% return? You went into the multiple listing service and you looked at 3 other properties that sold, and you figured out their cap rate. Because in a multi-list, it'll have their net operating income and what they sold for. You just don't have the cap rate in the multi-list. So you can do the math and come up with the cap rate, and you say, oh boy, it looks like investors are willing to get somewhere between 8 and 10% a capitalization rate. Okay? So at 8%, the property's worth $437,500. And what would they get on this situation? What would the sale price be at 10% cap rate? What's 35,000 divided by 10? What is it?
350.
350. So now you have to look and make a decision. Do you want to use an 8% cap rate? Do you want to use a 9% or 10%? And you'd look at the property and try to figure out the one that was the most similar or the best comp. Does that make sense, Tam? Okay. I know you guys have just been itching to do math, haven't you?
It's a from scratch.
Huh?
It's a from scratch.
And that picnic table helps you with this, with figuring a capitalization rate. So when we passed these picnic tables out the other day, Samantha, you were probably confused, weren't you? What the hell do we need this for? I don't know. I'm more confused than ever. But if you get a capitalization rate question, you're going to be able to use this picnic table and it's going to help you through it. Now, won't it? Okay. And Thursday, Dave Wilhelm's going to be here and Miss Andrea all day. And it's going to be review. And he will review some math. So you're going to really like Dave. He's really a good, entertaining instructor. And you're going to really enjoy him. Very knowledgeable. And he's going to go all day and do review. We're going to have handouts for you. We already have the handouts prepared, right, Andrea?
Yeah, they're
And you're going to be able, so you're going to have to take those with you because I'm not going to bring. Oh, we're going to talk
We're
about
gonna leave
that.
them.
We'll talk about that at the break. And he's going to go through a PowerPoint presentation and he's just going to touch on just about everything. And that's going to really put you in a good position for Tuesday to take the exam, the final exam. Okay? Now, you heard about that gross porta john over by the Heinz Field, right? Now, we said if you're trying to figure out the gross rent multiplier, you don't use this exact system, right? With the big rock, little rock, and all that. And the gross rent multiplier, see, when we do capitalization rate, Ray, we're looking at these comparable properties that have sold, and we're looking at the expenses, and we're drilling down to the net, right? And then we're putting a capitalization rate. The gross rent multiplier, you don't do that. You just look at the gross rent, okay? And you come up with a number. And this is a technique for estimating value based on the gross rent. And it's the gross rent times a multiplier equals value. So let's say you had a sale price of $125,000. Okay, and the gross monthly rent was $1,200.
What did you say? What was the question again?
Right here. If
Oh, okay.
the sale price was 125 and the gross rent was 1,200. Now we're talking about the gross rent, not the net rent. You use the net in the capitalization rate. You take the 125 divided by 1,200, what do you get?
What page are you on?
I'm not even on a page. I'm just pulling numbers out of the air.
104?
Okay, so look at the little picnic table that I gave you. Remember I said that the gross area of that porta john doesn't apply with the big rock, little rock system? With the gross rent multiplier and area, it's flipped over backwards. The big rock would be on top, the little number would be on the bottom. Okay? And if you're trying to figure area, it's backwards. So just remember, it's not the big rock, little rock, because the big rock goes down faster on all the other situations. But with area or gross rent, it's the opposite. The bigger number's on top. I mean, that's easy to remember, ain't it? I don't know. Maybe I'm confusing you, maybe I'm not. So if we're looking for, we have the picnic table and we're doing a gross rent. So the bigger number we know is going to be on the top for gross rent. If the gross rent is how much in this, it is in this situation, $1,200, right? It would go on the bottom. And we said the sale price was 125. It goes on top. The fraction still goes on the bottom. So what's 125 divided by 1,200? Yeah. 104, maybe 0.5, 0.17. Okay. So that's the gross rent multiplier. So now, you do 2 or 3 properties like that, and you see you have a gross rent multiplier coming in anywhere between 104 with 17 cents and 106. Okay? And you say, well, we're going to use a gross rent multiplier. You look at the subject prop, you look at the comparables, and say, this one's more comparable, and it has a gross rent multiplier of 106. So we know 106 is the gross rent multiplier. And we know that the unit makes $1,500 a month. Gross rent. So you multiply 15 because the bigger number we're trying to find the value. What would the value, estimated value of that one be? Which 1,500 times 106. What is it? There you go, 159. So that's how you can use the gross rent multiplier to help determine the value. Okay? Andrew, you have a second? We're going to step out. Hold up here for a second. Let's see if we can get this working.
She emailed me back.
What's that?
She emailed me back.
75?
I don't know, I gotta read it.
Go ahead and read it before we go out.
It looks like 75.
Okay. We're freezing up, guys. Sorry about that.
It says on the final exam.
75?
Yeah.
Okay. So then that chart's right then.
Yeah, we're all good then.
We're having a problem with the internet with this gross rent multiplier. Are we on the right Wi-Fi here? Can you play with it? Like in the restroom, see if you can get it going.
So where do you find the cap rates?
You can't be great at everything. Nope.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Michael Simpson here, the founder of the
it going?
Yeah. your second plan.
Real Estate Association with you here today. I thought I'd do a short video on the cap rate. I put up this video the other day on the gross rent multiplier. And somebody said, hey, Michael, what's an easier way to determine value, the GRM or the cap? And I said, gosh, it's a great question. And it's one that I talk about a lot in class, but I wanted to cover that. The answer to that is that the cap rate's a truer reflection of value because the cap rate takes into consideration vacancy and expenses. The GRM just says, hey, what's the sales price and what's the scheduled gross income? Take the GR.
Okay, so when we're looking at the capitalization rate, remember I said that it's the gross rent minus expenses, right? But what we also look at with the cap rate is vacancy rate and maintenance. You work those numbers in. Because if you were going to buy an investment property, a 10-unit building, would you want to know what the net would be if you have some vacancy?
Mhm.
So you go into the market, you see what the vacancy rate is typically, or you can look at the history on that unit, and maybe the history on that unit is it's got a 10% vacancy rate. That out of 10 units, most of the time you're looking for a tenant for one of them. Okay, and then you can do the same with maintenance. I usually just cheat and use 10% for vacancy and 10% for maintenance. But you know, if you look at the building and the buildings that really needed a lot of repair, you may go with a higher percentage for the maintenance. Okay, so that's why the cap rate is better. We very rarely even talk about the gross rent multiplier. The only place we talk about is here in this class. Most investors want to see the capitalization rate because it's a better method because it takes into consideration vacancy and maintenance and what utilities the owner pays. Okay, so if you have an apartment building and the owner's paying the water, and you're comparing with another apartment building where the owner doesn't pay for the water, the net operating income is going to be a good number for you, but the gross rent may be off a little bit because it's not taking into consideration those expenses. So typically the gross rent multiplier, you know, there may be some investors that use it as a quick, but mostly the capitalization rate's the better one to use.
Take the sales price divided by the SGI, I'll give you a number. Okay, that's all it does. The cap rate's a little different. So let's take a look at how you get to the cap rate. So just to recap, if you have an asset that's monthly rents are $8,333 per month, you take that times 12, that gives you $100,000. So you have an asset that's generating $100,000 of income, scheduled gross income, SGI of $100,000. So what we do is we take 5% of 100,000, that gives us our vacancy factor. Then we subtract it, and it gives us what we call gross scheduled income, GSI, and that's, in this case, is $95,000. Then what we're going to do is take a 35% expense factor. So we're going to take 35% times 95,000. That's where we're getting 33,250 for our expense factor. Then we subtract that from the 95,000, and what's left over is $61,750. That's where we're getting our NOI. So our NOI in this case is $61,750. Now let me back up. The reason that we're using 5%, 35% are several reasons. One, the lender's going to require us to use these types of numbers. Okay, so let's say, and some lenders might require a higher expense factor, vacancy factor, like 10%. Where I'm standing right now is Southern California, multifamily. Let's say, for example, densely populated area, 5%, maybe even 10% for the vacancy factor for most lenders. Let's say you're out in the middle of nowhere, though. Maybe it's a rural area in the middle of Ohio. There's no cows, barns, dirt roads, not a lot around. That vacancy factor is going to be much, much higher. Who would you call to find out what you should use? A lender. Call a lender in that area, or one of our lenders that we use may even know some contacts out there, or may even know what it should be. And they'll tell you, but the vacancy factor would most likely be much, much higher. Same thing with the expense factor. Again, lenders would require us to use at least 35% as a minimum. It could be higher. Maybe it's deferred maintenance, means a lot of work. Maybe it's master metered and there's only one meter for all utilities. Tenants, owners paying all the utilities. Maybe it's in another area. Maybe it's in a cold area back east where it snows. So maybe it's more expensive to operate. So that could be higher depending on those factors.
Does that make
Okay, Southern
sense?
California, multifamily, again, it's gonna be about 35% as a minimum. It could be, the third thing that would determine these factors would be the asset
I'm gonna
type.
say, don't
So
get too
again,
caught
the
up
area,
on it,
the lender, the product
Okay.
type. Let's say it's a triple net, leased investment.
because he's throwing a lot of terminology out here that's, I can see Lonnie's giving me the poopy face.
I don't even know what he's talking about.
Okay, good. So we just need to know the gross rent multiplier. You're gonna go by the gross monthly rent, monthly, right? Monthly. And the cap rate, you use your net operating income, which is your yearly number. Remember, we said the cap rate, the guy's gonna make 24,000 profit that year net after expenses. So just know those two and you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And reconciliation is not the averaging of all three. Can I tell you something? You know what I used to do when I first got started? And I was doing appraisals. I would look at the adjusted sale price for the comps, and then I would just take the three, add them together and divide by 3 and come up with my number. And I did that, and my broker said to me, Tom, you're doing it the wrong way. You don't take the 3 and average it. You're doing the wrong thing, Tom. What you do is you do the work. And remember, what page was that appraisal with the adjustments on? Page 401. You do the work, and then see the adjusted value down on the bottom? You don't add those 4 together like I did, Samantha, and divide it by 4. You look at that and you say, you make an opinion by which one do you think would be the closest. By looking at that information, Seneca, where do you think your house is worth? Does that make sense, Jake? Okay. Okay, that's the appraisal section. Does anybody have any questions? Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's take a 5-minute break.